video, we'll be going over creating the passing poses for our basic walk. If you follow along with our previous podcast, we've already covered how to create contact poses, copy them forward, and checking our curve progression. So now let's move on to the passing poses, which fall halfway between our contact poses. So as stated, this walk we're doing is on 12s. So to split this in half, that means that 6 frames after our contact pose is where we're going to have our passing pose, since again, passing poses fall halfway between contact poses. So our first passing pose will be on frame 7 here, 6 frames after frame 1. So on our passing pose, this is when the foot is going to pick up and just go past the supporting leg, and the weight will be balanced over the supporting leg as the character is stepping forward. We're using a lot of our ortho views here, so let's go ahead and check our ortho side view first. And we'll start at the bottom again. Since the red foot will be the one stepping forward, the blue foot will be the supporting foot here. So we're going to go ahead and zero out our heel and our toe lift, because this foot will be going flat. Let's go ahead and shift the character's weight forward a little bit, because he'll be progressing forward here. Also, let's go ahead and go to this foot. It's going to translate forward. It's going to also pick up off of the ground. Again, it's going to roll off the ground and create an arc as it's stepping forward here. Now, we never want to use lift heel when the foot is off the ground. So let's zero this out, and we're going to be using toe tip. This is to get some drag in the toe, and using toe lift to actually get some flexibility. Now, it is possible that you can use heel instead of toe tip here, but if you do so, make sure that it's consistent throughout the scene. Whichever one you choose to use, whether it's heel or toe tip, just make sure it's consistent through the scene. I prefer using toe tip as it blends better with the down pose that we'll be working on later. And then we're going to translate that foot in closer to the supporting leg. So in our side view, you can see that the foot is just passing by the supporting leg here. Working our way up, we get to our cog, and because the contact poses were set up to be inverse of one another, such as 25 and negative 25, and our passing poses are halfway between that, halfway between two inverted values is going to be 0. So our rotate Y on passing poses is 0. This is also because, again, the rotation of the hips is dictated by the positioning of the feet. And since the feet are right beside one another here, there shouldn't be any twisting in the hips. Their hips are going to be straight lined up because the feet are lined up. However, because one leg is lifting up off the ground, it's going to cause the hips to tilt, as all this weight that's suddenly having to be supported by the character's hips pulls this side of the hips down. So all this weight that is now not supported on the ground is going to pull the hips down and cause the hips to tilt in rotate Z. So this is going to set up our extremes for rotate Z is our passing poses, as the character's hips tilt to go down with the lifted foot. And once more, I'm just going to type in a whole number to keep this clean. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is still balance. And we want to check the balance of our pose in our side ortho view and our front ortho view. Looking at our hips now, you can see it's obviously causing the leg to lock out. So let's drop our hips down. But we want to make sure our hips are pretty much right over the ball of the foot, the middle of the foot right here, like right where the foot meets the leg. That's where we want our hips to kind of come down at. So let's shift them forward a little bit. You see that goes right up the middle of the character's spine. Now let's check our ortho front view. And you can see he's way off balance here. If the character did this, he would fall over. So we need to actually shift the character's weight over with translate X. But before we really do that, let's go ahead and complete the rest of our back controls so we have a better view of what balance actually looks like for our passing poses. Again, we want to go ahead and zero out our rotate Y because our passing poses are halfway between our contact values. So on each of the back controls, we zero out our rotate Y. But much like before, the three back controls will counter what the hips are doing. So if the hips are rotated down in positive rotate Z, the three back controls, to get that contrapposto and contrast of this, will rotate in the opposite direction and go negative in rotate Z. In this case, I did shift select all three of them and rotate them all together to get a stronger line of action. So let's go with -10. Again, keep it a whole number. Then move up to our neck. Again, zero out our rotate Y. And we need to keep our head facing level, facing straight forward and remaining level now. You see the head is tilted, so we need to counter our rotate Z once more. We were negative on our torso on our back controls, so our neck is going to be positive. So we just have this alternating thing going up our torso where our hips are going in one direction, positive, our back controls will go the opposite direction, negative, and then our neck goes the opposite direction again, back to positive. Until we get our head straight. So let's say 15, and that keeps our head level. Now, with that in there, now let's adjust our translate X value for our weight shift. Again, you can see he's not quite in balance. We looked at it from the middle of this foot and drew like a plumb line going straight up. All of his weight's on this side. There's almost nothing to counterbalance him on this side of his body. So we need to shift his weight more until basically we want to get like running straight down the head and neck is coming right down over like the middle of the foot. So let's shift his weight more this way. And this is where I mentioned that the further apart your feet are, the more the character is going to have to shift his weight to be in balance here. Let's go at 4. And again, make sure this kind of comes in a little bit. Alright, so now let's move over to our arms. Let's go ahead and zero out both our shoulder controls. And for our arm swing, not going to worry a whole lot about it, but want the arms to be closer to the character's side on the passing pose. Not worry a lot about it because usually you're going to be tweaking your arms up until the last minute. When you're doing finessing, you'll still be tweaking your arms, and you'll have your poses in, you can handle it more straight ahead. So not trying to get it in the exactly perfect position, but we just do want them to swing down closer to the character's side and not like interpenetrate with legs or anything like that. And once we have those in place, we can go ahead and key that pose. So now we have our contact to our passing. Now moving forward with this, we're going to go ahead and create our second passing pose. And in this case, we can do some of this in the graph editor just by typing in the opposite values that we need. So once more, let's go to our contact pose, and then 6 frames after that will be our next passing. And we're going to start it like we did our previous passing pose. Again, now this will be our supporting foot. So let's go ahead and zero out our heel and toe lift to make the foot flat. And then we'll translate this foot forward and up. Get rid of the lift heel and add toe tip and toe lift to create some drag in the toe and some flexibility. Grab our arms and our cog, shift them forward a bit to make sure the character's going to be in balance. Up there. Reverse our arms. And as I'm skipping all of the torso things and everything, because that's the stuff I'm going to go ahead and then adjust in the graph editor. And then we'll tweak the pose from there. These come forward, zero out our shoulders, and from there I'm going to go ahead and key this pose. Now obviously that's not a complete pose, we didn't do anything with the curve progression, but what I'm going to do is walk up our body and create that curve progression manually. And this will give a better idea of what's actually happening in our body. So let's start with our rotate Z on our cog. And before, on our previous passing pose, it was 15. So now we're just going to type in minus 15. Our rotate Y should be 0. And our translate X, opposite is 4, so let's type in -4. So that gets him shifting his weight in the opposite direction. The hips tilted down with the supporting leg, and it zeroes out our rotate Y. Now obviously you can see that that's causing that leg to lock out, so let's go ahead and lower that down. And then move up with the rest of our body. We're going to grab our low back, rotate Z, was -10, so now +10. And rotate Y should be 0. So don't forget you have to address both the rotate Z and the rotate Y. And now we can readjust our arms so that they're not going through the body or too far out or anything like that. Again, keeping them close to the character's side on our passing pose. And then we'll do the same for that lifted leg as well. Translating it in closer to the supporting leg for balance. The further it comes out, the more the character has to shift his weight to remain in balance. So good thing to shift that leg in, translate that leg in, that foot into the supporting leg, and translate X. There. So now we have our new passing pose. Going to rekey that now, just in case, get everything squared away there. Now once we have our first two passing poses in, we can once again copy these forward very much like we did with the contact poses. So after 25, we need another passing pose on 31. It's going to be when the character's standing on his blue foot. So we can go back and find the last time the character stood on his blue foot, which should be back here at 7. So I'm going to take 7 and middle mouse forward 31. And again, going to key that. So that allows us to, again, put keys from frame 7 on the 31 easily. Because using middle mouse from 7 to 31 allows us to move without updating the scene. So now we're animating on frame 31 even though we're looking at all the values from frame 7. So now when we left mouse here, what's going to happen is the character is going to teleport back because he steps, and then all of the values from 7 come back into play. Well, that's not really what we need. We need this blue foot to stay in place so that it stays in place as the red foot steps forward here. So once more, we're going to, using left mouse, go to 25 and select the blue foot, the foot that's going to be taking the character's weight, and going to middle mouse onto frame 31. And once more, only selecting the translation and rotations, not selecting everything in the foot, not using our mail button. We only want to key the translation and rotations to keep that foot in place here. We're going to select those, right click, key selected. Now when we left mouse off of this, now we're going to get another broken pose. So if I left mouse off of this to allow it to update and then come back to it, you can see it's way back there because it still wants to get all the other values from back at 7, but it did what we needed it to do by keeping the blue foot in place. You can see the control doesn't move. So that's correct. Now we can grab our opposite foot, shift select our hands, our cog, our elbows, and our eyes, and then translate them all forward until that lifted foot is beside our supporting leg again, and then key that. So now we've copied forward that passing pose, and you can continue to do that as many times as needed to continue copying forward your poses for your walk. Now before we close, let's get a quick review of what's happening in our curve progression. Starting with our cog, you can see now we have this mini stair-step design here where we're hitting our extreme values and then we get into our zero values. So for rotate Z, again, our contacts are going to be 0 and our extremes are going to be our passing poses. This is as far as our hips will tilt in rotate Z, is on our passing poses. And then it hits 0 and then it tilts in the opposite direction. And then hits 0 and tilts back in the previous direction, etc. Rotate Y. It's a very similar design. It's just that the extremes and zero values are on different poses now. Rotate Y, our extremes on our contact pose, and 0 is going to fall on our passing pose. So now we have our hips twisting, rotating in Y, and then hit 0, and then goes in the opposite direction, and then hit 0 again, and comes back to the previous direction, and so forth. Translate X, very similar to our rotate Z. On our contact poses is 0 because it's right between our feet, and it's going to leave the feet at 0 because our feet should be equidistant. That means that's going to be our starting place. Then on our passing pose, it's going to hit the extreme, as the character has to shift his weight over to one side to shift his weight over one foot, then comes back to a contact, and then shifts his weight over to the other foot. Working our way up our body, we want to make sure the same thing is following true with our back controls. So you can see back controls look just like the cog. They're just happening at a different spot because they're rotating opposite of what the cog is doing. So again, when the cog was negative, the back controls will be positive and vice versa. But we're still getting that stair-step design because our extremes are still happening for rotate Z on our passing poses and 0 on our contact poses, and rotate Y is still hitting the extremes on contact poses and then coming 0 on the passing poses. The neck, we can see is having the same thing, extreme on the passing pose for rotate Z, 0 on our contact poses. So now we've really started to create the foundation of our curve progression. These are the really important parts because they are setting up our extreme values and our 0 values. If these aren't correct, then as we go further on in the walk, it's going to be much harder to make your curve progression flow smoothly and fluidly as it's supposed to, because these set up your waypoints, essentially your extreme values, 0 values. The ups and downs that we go into next will fall between these values. So this is why it's so important that you make sure you spend time and understand where your curve progression is hitting the extreme values and the 0 values. On what pose should rotate Y be the extreme? On what pose should rotate Z be extreme? What pose should translate X be extreme? And when should they be the 0 values? Make sure you firmly understand that before moving on to our down poses, which we'll be covering in our next video. Thanks for watching.